So I just wanted to go over a couple of things. Camera's not very steady. Hopefully it doesn't fall. Okay. Um, I read this article and I've been trying to think of why people think this is an okay thing that's happening. Why they're kind of so complacent with it, and what it is about the people who are enabling this to happen. And when I say this thing, I mean multiple factors, but mostly the lockdown, because it is my firm belief that this lockdown has very little to do with public health per se, and has a lot more to do with installing a new way of life for everyone. Look up Agenda 2030, look up the World Government Summit. If you Google that, you'll find a UN-linked think tank that's put out the world in 2071 and how they're going to get there. You can watch the video there. It's very professional, but we're in the age of connectivity for the world. Between the years 2018 and 2030, that's where we appear to be right now. And the pandemic, or the supposed pandemic, that is much more about creating ill health for the economy and trapping everybody into accepting this new normal, this new way of life. That seems to be about basic income. It's there in the video. They talk about basic income and how they're going to give it to everybody, and this is really just for the best. And I wanted to talk about this book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution by Klaus Schwab, that I've been reading pretty much for the last couple of days. Produced by the World Economic Forum. If you know who that is, that's the guys that basically run the world economy, and they get together, they talk about what direction it should take and how do we help people and who's getting hurt and how do we fix that. But I just wanted to read to you from this part, page 25. They're talking about what's going on, where the world's headed. Basically, the fourth industrial revolution would be, as it is said, the fourth industrial revolution. This one involves the power of AI, ubiquitous computing, connectivity, all the kind of stuff that the Internet of Things is supposed to make the world better with. Part of making the world better seems to be figuring out what to do with all the people that will be disenfranchised by the jobs that are going to be lost. With technological unemployment becoming very prevalent, they estimate that as many as 50% of the jobs that exist today will be gone. So really this is about, and this is in like 10 years. It's 2020 now. By 2030, they estimate that's the way that it's going. So Agenda 2030 is about getting the world all set and ready for that, coincidentally, I suppose. And right now in the book, he's talking about what the trends are that are shaping this kind of shift of the world economy. And one of the things that he's talking about is called tipping points. So here on page 25, 2.2, tipping points. When these megatrends are discussed in general terms, they seem rather abstract. They are, however, giving rise to very practical applications and developments. A World Economic Forum report published in September 2015 identified 21 tipping points, moments when specific technological shifts hit mainstream society, that will shape our future digital and hyper-connected world. They are all expected to occur in the next 10 years and therefore vividly capture the deep shifts triggered by the Fourth Industrial Revolution. The tipping points were identified through a survey conducted by the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on the Future of Software and Society, in which over 800 executives and experts from the information and communications technology sector participated. So this is something they've been talking about. And really, they're basically talking about, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to make sure that the best possible outcomes can be achieved for the largest possible amount of people? That's what this book is about. Basically, they're deciding the future of humanity without really polling much of humanity other than the people who already run the businesses. The scale and breadth of the unfolding technological revolution will usher in economic, social, and cultural changes of such phenomenal proportions that they are almost impossible to envisage. Nevertheless, this chapter describes and analyzes the potential impact of the Fourth Industrial Revolution on the economy, business, governments, and countries, society, and individuals. That's the whole world. They're just talking about what they're going to do for the whole world. That's what this book is about, okay? So, I started off talking about why I think this pandemic is much less about a pandemic and much more about changing things into the new world order. Whatever that is. Well, I'm telling you what it is. Those people say it's going to be this thing where we have the Internet of Things, and what people are going to be expected to do with their lives, first of all, they're going to have to adapt. I haven't finished the book yet, but I wanted to address specifically the damage that's being done to everyday people's lives. Our power to have commerce and have lives and social lives and enjoy entertainment and a fine meal and maybe even some French fries by the beach and play sports. All these things are quality of life issues. And I mean, there's been some pretty scary stuff being floated as far as how this stuff's. I saw the most hilarious video today for a hugging machine where there's this big plastic wall for hugging your grandparents to keep them from getting sick, and one person, there's arms on one side and arms on the other side, and you come together and you put your arms over each other and you can have a hug through the plastic barrier. This is inhuman. This is insane. This is nuts. What are we doing? What are we talking about? We're going to put our kids in these bubbles in classrooms, space them 6 feet apart. We're going to paint circles all over the parks and tell everybody, hey, by the way, don't step in my circle, man. Who's enforcing this stuff? Who? The only people who can enforce this stuff is people themselves. This is a massive mind control experiment. And if you don't see it happening, you're really not paying attention. But what are the motivations again? It's a transitional period. So if you thought about the best way to protect people in general during what you thought was going to be a very disruptive transitional period, and you wanted to give them some sort of prophylactic to protect them from the possible negative outcome of something that could be violent. I don't know, like maybe all the violence you see happening with the somewhat provoked race war you see happening right now all over the United States. That's real violence. But this is a kind of thing where it's a prophylactic approach to life. Why? Because if you put everybody in their own bubble and you scare them so they stop asking questions, and you confuse them with various streams of information, left, right, up, down, inside out, outside in. Uh-oh. So it's... The boys are misbehaving. Who would come up with a plan like this? These types of people would. Can you turn the light back on, please? I'm doing something down here, okay? Public health people would do that. And what do? They always do things because they mean the best. At least that's what theoretically they're trying to do. But they're overachievers. They're busybodies. So I want to read to you from page 130, starting most of the way down the page. If you happen to get this book, it says poor health. The only justification for paternalistic public health policies is the benefit to the health of individuals. It is therefore concerning that they not only often fail to achieve this, but sometimes actively damage health. The unintended, though predictable, consequences of encouraging the sale of dangerous black market products have already been discussed. Sometimes, however, it is the intended consequences that creates the problem. Politicians, doctors, academics, and pressure groups are not infallible, and there are far-reaching implications when their opinions and prejudices are turned into law. Here, well, I'm not going to keep reading that. I wanted to read that too. Who are these people? What do they believe? What do they think? Why would they think that it was so necessary? Okay, we have the fourth industrial revolution coming on. What else? What else would motivate a group of otherwise well-meaning people to do this kind of thing and maybe collaborate on this kind of thing and be a part of it? I don't know that anyone is necessarily a part of this as if it's some kind of grand conspiracy, other than to say, never let a crisis go to waste. Naomi Klein wrote about it in The Shock Doctrine. Of course, her barbs were aimed squarely at right-wing people. She tends to only see the world as being done harm by right-wing people, even though she did write a very interesting article in The Guardian a few days ago talking about all the ways that Eric Schmidt from Google and who's the other fellow there, had basically they came and proposed all these solutions and all these connection technology things they've been pushing before this happened, and now it's going into full effect with partnership in New York City and large cities like that. But she wrote this book, This Changes Everything, a few years ago. I want you to read this part right here. Okay, let's see. Naomi Klein, This Changes Everything. Capitalism versus the climate. That's what this book is about. I don't agree with a lot of the stuff in that book. But it's not exactly a skinny book. It's a nice big thick book. Lots of documentation, basically all back to The Guardian. I'm just kidding. But you know, left-wing academics, and they have invaded the institutions. They have invaded government think tanks. They have invaded every which part of our society, because that's what social studies is. It's really leftist take on the world. Not that there isn't a right-wing take on social studies, but right-wing tends to be classified as much more business savvy or oriented, or maybe they just care about the bottom line. That's all people on the right care about, is the bottom line, and they want to take away women's rights. I mean, I'm not left-wing or right-wing, to be honest. I hate those labels, but the left is pretty dangerous, and I think people forget that. So then we have this book, The Red Flag, A History of Communism, by David Priestland. And I just want to read you something from the intro. In November of 1989, the Berlin Wall, the concrete and graffiti-daubed symbol of division between the communist East and the capitalist West, was breached. Joyful demonstrators from both sides danced and clamored on the wreckage of Europe's ideological wars. Earlier that year, communism had been dealt another blow by popular protests, though on that occasion brutally suppressed, in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. And so, exactly a century after the ascendancy of organized international communism was marked by the foundation of the Second International of Communist Parties, and 200 years after the partisan populace had stormed another symbol of authoritarian order, the Bastille, revolution had once again erupted in the world's capitals. These new revolutions, however, were aimed not at toppling the bastions of traditional wealth and aristocratic privilege, but at destroying states supposedly dedicated to the cause of the poor and oppressed. The dramatic and largely unprecedented fall of communism in 1989 was, then, much more than the collapse of an empire. It was the end of a 2-century-long epoch, in which first European and then world politics was powerfully affected by a visionary conception of modern society, in which the wretched of the earth would create a society founded on harmony and equality. For many, communism could now be consigned to Trotsky's rubbish heap rubbish heap of history, a hopeless detour into a cul-de-sac, an awful mistake. The American academic Francis Fukuyama's claim that history, or the struggle between ideological systems, had ended with the victory of liberal capitalism, was greeted with much skepticism, but deep down many believed it. Liberalism, not class struggle, was the only way to resolve social conflict, and capitalism was the only economic system that worked. And for some time, the world seemed to lose interest in communism. It seemed to be fading. It seemed to be a fading set of sadly fossilized attitudes surviving amongst a generation that would soon be crushed by the forces of reform. It was a phenomenon best left to dry scholarship, an ancient civilization akin perhaps to the ancient Persians, with its own Ozymandian wreckage, reminding us of past illusions. In the mid-1980s, when I began to research communism at the height of the Cold War tensions, it seemed an exciting subject, but within a decade it seemed irrelevant in a new world of triumphant liberal capitalism. However, two events in this decade have brought communism back to the foreground of public attention. The first, the destruction of New York's Twin Towers on the 11th of September 2001, had no direct connection with communism at all. Indeed, the Islamist terrorists responsible were militantly anti-Marxist. Nevertheless, the Islamists, like the communists, were a group of angry radicals who believed they were fighting against Western imperialism, and parallels were soon being drawn by politicians, journalists, and historians. Though the term Islamofascism was more commonly used than Islamocommunism, Islamism has been widely depicted as the latest manifestation of totalitarianism, a violent, anti-liberal, and fanatical family of ideologies that includes both fascism and communism. For American neoconservatives, these threats demand an ideological and military struggle every bit as determined as the one Ronald Reagan waged against communism in the Third World. In 2004, the European Parliament's centre-right party sought to condemn communism as a movement on par with fascism, whilst in June 2007, President George W. Bush dedicated a memorial to the victims of communism in Washington, D.C. If the September 11th attack shows that post-1989 political order had not resolved serious conflicts in the Middle East, the fall of the American bank Lehman Brothers on the 15th of September 2008 and the financial crisis it triggered demonstrated that post-1989 economic order had failed to create stable, sustainable, and enduring prosperity. The lessons drawn from these latter events, however, had differed from those learnt in 2001. Whilst nobody is calling for the return to the rigid Soviet economic model, Marx's critique of the inequality and instability brought by unfettered global capital had seemed prescient. Sales of capital, his masterwork, have soared in his German homeland. The history of communism, therefore, seems to be more relevant to today's concerns than it was in the early 1990s. However, we have found it difficult to grasp the nature of communism, much more so than other aspects of our recent history. Whilst many warned of the Nazis' aggression and their persecution of the Jews, very few predicted the Bolshevik Revolution, Stalin's terror, Khrushchev's de-Stalinization, and the Cultural Revolution, Pol Pot's killing fields, or the collapse of the USSR. In part, the obsessive secrecy of communist regimes accounts for this. But more important has been the enormous gap between the outlook of historians and commentators today and the communist views of the world at the time. Explaining communism demands that we enter a very different mental world, that of Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Ho Chi Minh, Che Guevara, and Gorbachev, as well as those who supported or tolerated them. You'd think like them. What was it that made these people do what they did? It's not just like it was this ideological battle and we beat them and it's over and now we have capitalism and everything's great. No, you have to understand where they were coming from, why they thought they could do what they could do, what they did, and why they thought it was justified. And so I keep thinking, why do people think this is justified? Who thinks that what we're doing right now, killing people's freedom, and that's what we are doing, is somehow going to make us safer? I'm already throwing out the idea that this SARS-2 is as deadly as they say. It was fascinating. I ran into a side note. I ran into a girl when I went up to our local supermarket here yesterday, and I noticed first of all, seeing people in these masks drives me nuts. I'm not going to go into it. But I saw this girl. She was a fit girl, and she looked like a together person. I would guess around her mid-30s, and she wasn't wearing a mask. And so I said to her, "Hey, I hope you don't mind my asking, but you look like a healthy person, and you're not wearing a mask. What do you make of all this?" And we got into a long conversation. It was like 15 to 20-minute conversation. It turns out she works in public health. She's not a nurse or a doctor, but she's a former teacher and involved. She did some kind of work with technology, where she did something to do with algorithms, and she also had some other kind of work that she did where basically it put her all into the right position to do the job she's doing now, whereas she presents information, I believe, to the government in the form of statistics and data for them to base assessments off of. And during the course of the conversation, number one, she told me that the masks were counterproductive, and that we agreed that the government messaging from the top, at least from Canada, has been perplexing, to say the least. The fact is, unless you're sick and you might be coughing or sneezing or oozing or whatever's going on there, you shouldn't be wearing a mask. You shouldn't be wearing a mask. There's no justification for it. I'm not going to go into it, but the other thing that she said was very interesting to me. Very interesting to me. Was she said, I said, well, what's the justification for all of this? Can you explain to me? I don't understand. It doesn't make sense. She says, well, it's got a 7% mortality rate. And I said, what? 7? Sorry, did you say 7%? She says, yes. Yeah, it's got a 7% mortality rate. And I said, well, how did you come to that conclusion? She said, well, it's easy. You just take the amount of people that have died, passed, unfortunately, from this, and then you divide that by the amount of people that have been infected, and there you go. Anybody can do it. And I said, well, what about all the asymptomatic cases and the people that got sick and they didn't develop the symptoms, and so they didn't go to get tested? Where does that come on your analysis? She says, well, a large part of the analysis is based on the long-term care homes. And actually part of the problem, part of the conversation we were having was I wanted her to read this article. And I think everybody should read this article. If you have not yet, you need to. It's from offguardian.org. That's off-guardian.org. From May 26th of 2020, Work Conditions for High Death Rates at Care Homes Created on Purpose by Rosemary Fry. You need to read this article. It's fascinating. I'm always interested in the psychology of people and the people that are doing this, and maybe the people that worked at these homes. You should really check this out. Well, whatever, you can't see that. Check it out. But I wanted to discuss that with her. Oh, that's where else she worked in nursing homes, and we were talking about that, and she was talking about how sick people are, and she also said, a lot of people in Canadian society are sick, and so if this thing became widespread, that's why she thinks that this death rate would be very high. And we didn't get to go on much farther than that. We were standing there talking in the middle of the grocery store for 20 minutes, 15 minutes, and that she moved on. But I was fascinated by this person that is supposedly presenting information to the government, was telling them it had a 7%. I said, if you're telling me there's 100 people, 100 people get sick with this thing, for every 100 people, 7 people are going to die. That's what you think. That's what you really believe. And she says, yeah. I couldn't believe it. Then we started discussing human immune systems, and doesn't matter. This thing is not anywhere close to being that deadly. It's not I posted something on my own Facebook page yesterday. My name is Andrew Corner. You can go look it up. Yesterday morning, yesterday would have been May 30th. I think I posted it then. Go check it then. I posted the numbers from New York. This is not justified. This is not justified. Out of 15,000 people in New York City, supposedly, that got diagnosed as sick from this thing. Sorry, 15,000 people, over 15,000 people that were killed from the best estimates of May 14th or something like that. And again, those numbers are highly inflated. Less than 100 were killed that were under 65 years of age without a serious comorbidity. You have to be very sick to die from this thing, assuming that people are even dying from this thing. I mean, there's a lot of other questions that surround that, but I mean, I just wanted to talk about the psychology of the people that, again, I didn't want to start talking about SARS-2, commonly referred to as COVID. I don't know why. COVID is the symptoms. This book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution, Killjoys, this changes everything. This is the psychology of the people who want to impose these lockdowns. Do all of these things have anything to do specifically with the lockdown? Yes. Yes, these are public policy people, and they're doing what they think is right. And in the meantime, you're hearing about the rollout of all kinds of things that they already wanted to enact before. Again, go Agenda 2030. They want equality for all, but at a price, and that price is your freedom. So they're taking away your freedom, and people are sitting back and letting it happen without questioning any of it. I mean, well, that's not true. I mean, a large portion of, like, people are really kind of fed up with this thing, and the riots that you see going on in the United States right now, I don't know what's going to come of that. It does seem very provoked. Interestingly, I just wrote on my own Facebook page, you know, why is it that it seems like CNN and RT are really pushing this race stuff? I mean, they're pushing it like crazy. We were worried about RT stealing the election. You remember that? Didn't they win Donald Trump the war in 2016? Well, what are they doing now? If you believe that, if you're one of the people that believe that, by the way, it's unequivocally not true, but if you believe that, I bet you watch RT2 and you're seeing some of those clips. It appeals much more to the left. You know how I know that RT didn't help Donald Trump win the war? Because I stopped watching RT because they were so left and they were so ridiculous leading up to that election, that to suggest that they elected the president was, I mean, it was just beyond the pale of stupid. And I only know that because I watched RT a lot up until that point. And they push a lot of left-wing ideology, and I didn't see it. I didn't see it. Admittedly, I have changed a lot of the things that I see due to the election of Trump. I'm not going to say I'm not defending Trump. Trump's doing what Trump's doing because, honestly, I think he's trying to help people, but I'm not sure what's going on anymore. I don't want to get into Trump. I don't want to get into disease. I wanted to talk about the psychology of these people, and I specifically wanted to try to keep that light from shining. Read this one article, which I thought was really, he nails it here. This is The Untold Story, A Lockdown Line in the Sand by David Cole, written May 26th, 2020. This one, I might have a little trouble reading it because it's not very bright down here. In May 1940, Hitler and Himmler were having one of their little slumber party. He writes in a little bit of he's being a little tongue-in-cheek here. We're having one of their little slumber party bull sessions, exchanging gossipy notes like schoolgirls. Himmler gave his Führer a memo titled "Treatment of Alien Races in the East." The gist of the memo was that under German control, the ethnic minorities of the Eastern Territories will be kept subservient, uneducated, and supervised. Jews will be expelled, and the ethnic concepts of Ukrainians, Gorals, and Lemkos will disappear by non-lethal means. Because Himmler distressed the notion of physical extermination, as un-German and Bolshevist. Hitler replied that Himmler's take on the situation was very good and correct. The H-twins recognized physical extermination as a taboo, a line that shouldn't be crossed. Stalin had crossed that line, and no one wants to be like Stalin, right? Wrong. A year later, Hitler and Himmler reversed their stance. The mass murder of male adult Russian Jews began in the weeks following Barbarossa. It soon expanded to include female adult Russian Jews. At the time, however, the action was limited in scope and geography. Arthur Neby, I'm sorry if I don't say that correctly, commander, well, I'm not sorry, he's a dick apparently. Commander of the Einsatzgruppe B was killing Jews left and right that summer of 41, but he had misgivings, not about the killing, but about the feasibility of continuing the killing once the area was pacified. There will have to be a better solution than murder for the remaining Jews, he mused in a July 25, 1941 memo. There are too many of them in Belarus to kill. Mass deportation, Neby noted, would be the only viable method of cleansing. Some months later, Wilhelm Kube, General Commissar of Belarus, voiced his own apprehensions regarding the Jews being sent to Minsk from the Reich. Yes, Kube confirmed the Russian Jews needed to be killed, no dispute there, but the German and Austrian Jews being sent east were of Germanic blood. They looked, spoke, and acted German. Some had even fought for Germany in World War I. They were, as Kube noted in December 1941, of our Kulturkreis, unlike the bestial native hordes. Kill the Slavic Jews, sure, but hands off the ones that share our DNA. Himmler and Hitler had initially rejected physical extermination on moral grounds. It shouldn't be done to anyone. Nebe rejected it on practical grounds. It can't be done. And Kube rejected it on sentimental grounds. It shouldn't be done to our kin. But by the middle of 1942, all four had changed their tune. For a thorough examination of why, I recommend a book. Never mind. Physical Extermination of the Jews of Poland and Russia. I haven't looked at the book. That's why I'm ignoring it. By a tiny Jew named David. He linked it, but I didn't pull the link, obviously, yet. Physical extermination of the Jews of Poland and Russia and the Reich Jews in Minsk became the accepted solution. We knew what not to do, we knew what we shouldn't do, and we transgressed. The Nazis did not go into World War II planning to break that taboo. They were hesitant. In fact, that's the point. They knew there was a taboo. They knew there was a line. And their first instinct was not to cross it. But just one second. Yeah! I'm just recording something. Can you give me 10 minutes? Yeah. Such is life. I could edit this, but I don't have time. There was a tattoo, then it was a line, and their first instinct was not to cross it, but eventually they did. We have to ask ourselves, what did they gain? Did they win the war? In fact, not only did they not win, but Himmler would rather sheepishly concede in 1944 that they'd made a major oopsie by killing so many Jews in 1942 that they now needed to import Jews from Hungary to fill the labor vacuum left by the mass killings. That line crossing will most certainly haunt Germany until the end of time. I'm not saying it's fair, but it's fact. Say what you will about the exaggerations and unfounded claims associated with Holocaust history, and there are many, but the simple truth is the Nazis did abandon their initial caution about physical extermination, and they paid the price. And generations of Germans have paid the price since. Germany as a nation continues to pay the price. That line crossing profited no one at the time, and has only caused harm since. Here lieth the lesson for government officials and policy makers. Think carefully before crossing the lines that give reasonable men pause. Now, some governments can not only cross but obliterate certain lines and totally get away with it. China is a perfect example. The CCP has killed millions and it keeps on killing. China gives hope to other dictators and demagogues. No tyrants, stormtroopers, or party functionaries commit transgressive acts expecting to end up swinging from a rope at a war crimes trial, just like nobody robs a bank expecting to get caught. That's just human nature. The American politicians who visited hell in this nation with mass lockdowns, forced cessation of commerce, and eradication of livelihoods expect to get away with it. They envision a future for themselves in which they're hailed as saviors, not condemned as monsters. 50 years from now, they think they'll be remembered as Mao by the Chinese, as Mao is by the Chinese communists, not as Hitler is by the world. This is interesting that Mao is remembered so fondly as is Che Guevara and not Stalin, but people still believe that communism is a viable solution. I mean, if you don't think what these guys are talking about in the fourth industrial revolution is just communism 2.0, it is. I mean, they're talking about technocratic elite control of society and telling you where you're going to go and how you're going to live your life and how it's going to be done and how much meat you're going to be allowed to have and where you should live and how big your apartment should be and how much air conditioning you should have in the summer and how much heat you should get in the winter. This is where all of this stuff is going. Now, am I saying that stuff won't be abundant? Sure, it might be. It might even be good. Could be good. But what about the people that don't agree? What about the people that want to live their lives still off-grid or living, they don't want the vaccines, they don't want a tracking app on their devices, they don't want people to know their personal business, they don't want to have all of their personal information monitored by AI with algorithm-enabled goals of making sure that people aren't up to bad stuff, you know? What about those people? Well, let's keep reading. And if you think I'm comparing the lockdowns to the Holocaust, I am. Not in terms of loss of life, but in terms of a monumental line crossing that can never be undone. The lockdowns have committed obscene violence against our rights and our Constitution. We are changed people because of them. Yes, there have been previous mass infringements of liberties in the U.S., from prohibition to manzanar. I don't even know what that is, manzanar. If somebody knows, go ahead and write it in the comments. I'll probably look it up. But they always came down through channels. It's telling that the same people who won't allow a single Trump executive order to go into effect without running it past judge after judge after judge to test for constitutionality has suspended basic rights for a majority of Americans based on dubious proclamations from mayors and governors. Funny how no one on the left wants to run the lockdown orders past a Hawaiian judge. The most basic constitutional rights of worship and assembly and other things the founders didn't think they'd have to enshrine, like the right to sit down and the right to leave one's home barefaced, have been abrogated because some tin-pot state and local officials invoked the "'cause I said so" rule. That's a cross line of dreadful magnitude. And just as with the Nazis, prior to crossing that line, the powers that be recognized the line and respected it. Although the form of quarantine can vary, it always represents a significant deprivation of an individual's liberty. All other restraints on liberty undertaken in the name of public health are less restrictive and often more effective alternatives to quarantine. In the 19th century, statutes did not require that any judicial order nor any notice and hearing accompany a quarantine. Today, our jurisprudence is far more process-oriented. That's Northeastern University law professor Wendy Parmet back in 1985 assuring us that mass quarantines were outdated relics, and besides, if they were ever tried in modern America, judges would have to sign off on them first. I mean, it's not like we'd ever leave that to the mayors. I like this guy. Another quote. Public health officials expect the U.S. quarantine today to almost always be voluntary, with incentives to cooperate. That's the AP from 2005, soothing us with the reassurance that any modern U.S. quarantine would, of course, be voluntary. We practice in this country quarantine every day. If a child gets the measles, their mothers are expected to keep them at home. That was Health and Human Services Secretary Mike Leavitt. Also in 2005, he said no mass quarantine would ever be any worse than this. Authorities first might urge people to watch football on TV instead of at the stadium, and to avoid shopping malls. Then schools might close for a while. Then people might be told to postpone holidays or business trips, all steps to stem transmission by minimizing contact. But well short of compulsory quarantine, well short indeed, compulsory mass quarantine would never be allowed. From Biosecurity and Bioterrorism, a peer-reviewed journal at the Center for Biosecurity at University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, September 2006. Quote, the negative consequences of large-scale quarantine are so extreme. Forced confinement of sick people with the well, complete restriction of movement of large populations, difficulty in getting critical supplies, medicines, and food to people inside the quarantine zone, that this mitigation measure should be eliminated from serious consideration. Yes, let's eliminate it from serious consideration. It can never happen here. And if that doesn't put your worries to rest, allow Professor Michael Dorf of Cornell University Law School to set your mind even more at ease in this essay from 2014. Government officials should not be permitted to issue quarantine orders without any judicial oversight. A person subject to quarantine, or, given the numbers that could be involved, a class action representative suing on behalf of many people subject to quarantine, should be permitted to challenge the quarantine itself. Quarantine amounts to an extraordinary serious limitation on liberty. Moreover, even a quarantine that is justified for purposes of preventing the spread of disease to the general population could put the individual subject to the quarantine at greater risk of becoming sick themselves by concentrating them among others with a higher risk of being infected. Accordingly, judicial review of government officials' claims that a quarantine is necessary to protect public health should not be a mere rubber stamp. A rubber stamp! Hell, in 2020 we'd kill for a rubber stamp! We never even got that much. Quote, the authorities say they will never lump together those who are ill and others only thought to be exposed, as happened frequently in past quarantines. That's the New York Times in 2003, writing from the city where the governor just lumped together all those who are ill and others only thought to be exposed. Quote, quarantine is rarely employed because it may unnecessarily restrict liberty and spread disease to quarantined persons who were not actually exposed. That's CDC-trained epidemiologist Harry Hull, at the same time the state epidemiologist for Minnesota and New Mexico, in 2014 also writing about the rarely employed thing that was just mass employed by a bunch of murderous governors. It's Trump's fault. So many promises, so many assurances, it'll never happen here, and if it does, it'll be voluntary. No compulsory mass quarantine, just eliminate that possibility from consideration. And even if someone were to try it, there'd be judicial oversight aplenty. Thorough oversight, not just rubber stamping, and there will never be, the sick will never be confined with the healthy. I mean, what are we, morons? Monsters? We knew what not to do. We knew what we shouldn't do. And we transgressed. Exactly 75 years ago to the day, the people of Germany ventured out into what remained a once thriving, powerful nation as their deposed leaders, the ones who crossed the line they knew better than to cross, departed the world via their own hand or at the end of a rope. We will not be so lucky. The people who brought us to ruin are still around and still in charge. It's going to take a lot of effort, more, I fear, than I almost got through it. It's going to take a lot more effort, more, I fear, than we may be willing or able to muster to stop them from crossing that line again any damn time they see fit. So who are these people? What's going on? Is there a virus? Sure. Is it deadly? For me, my family, 99% of the general public. Excuse me. I admit there's a segment of society that is more susceptible. I admit that. It seems like we didn't protect them very well. And if you read that article from the Off Guardian, it seems like maybe these people who are doing things they think are for the best, but also have ulterior motivations. Maybe they created the kind of conditions for people to do things that were not becoming of healthcare practitioners. Now, these are not healthcare people so much at these homes that they're condemning. especially in Toronto and other parts of Canada. But they had the job. They had the job, and I'm not going to go into it. I'm trying to wrap. I was trying to keep this quick. Apparently, I have to go upstairs and help, so I'm going to wrap it up. But read the article. Read books. Read Agenda 2030. Read what the Sustainable Development Goals are. It's about saving everyone from their freedom because they might hurt themselves if you don't. That's what communism does. Communism is about taking power away from people who they feel are bad actors and giving it to the masses. It always starts off that way. And then maybe people don't want to go along with it, and they're troublemakers towards that system, and so you have to deal with them. Re-education, maybe? I don't know. Would I have to be re-educated? I think that we should try to bring health and better outcomes for all people in the world. I do. Obviously. I don't want to see anybody hurt. I want people to be able to prosper by their own hand. But they're taking away that possibility. Okay? In communism, they took it away from the owners of things and supposedly gave the power to the people. This is a very similar justification based on climate change and the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And so, oh, and plus, I mean, I do have something to say about where public health has gone and how it got this way. But it's for another time. So I'm done rambling, and I hope that this made any kind of sense. And I don't know, it would be nice if you liked the video, share it if you thought anything I had to say was valuable. Maybe look up the sources that I gave you. I still work full-time and have a 5- and 7-year-old boy and a demanding wife. So I have my responsibilities, but I'm trying to do whatever little part I can to just try and get people thinking about what's happening here. Because this is not about a virus. It's not. This is about the connection period. You're getting connected right now to the rest of the world for your own good, whether you like it or not. And I have a feeling that if you don't like it, there's going to be consequences for you. Or me. Or whoever. Okay, peace.